Conservatives, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited. Like Lindsay mentioned, I want to speak to you today about women's rights, but by extension, I also need to speak to you about free speech, as I've realized over the past several years that the two things are inseparable, and both are under serious threat in British Columbia. I don't want to belabor my own story, but I will give a little summary for those of you who are not aware. While I've more recently been writing for the National Post and some other publications, including New Westminster Times, they're here today. I've also been a registered nurse for 13 years. For more than 4 years, however, I've been involved in legal battles, both to retain my charter-protected right to free expression and also to ensure that I don't lose my nursing license to practice. What did I say that was so terrible? Well, I've been involved in the divisive culture war over gender ideology for nearly a decade. I've said such terrible things as men cannot literally become women, and women deserve their own spaces free from biological males. Trans activists have been attempting to quote-unquote cancel me for years, and my professional regulator, the BC College of Nurses and Midwives, has gleefully joined them in trying to take me down. The jury's still out, but they're not going to win. Not the College of Nurses, and not the woke activists that have infiltrated our government and the institutions across our province. I wouldn't have so confidently said that just 3 years ago. But I do believe that the unlikely rise of the Conservative Party of BC and your damn near victory is a very clear sign that British Columbians have had it with the toxic politics of wokeness that define the new Democratic Party. My maternal grandparents were trade unionists and lifelong NDP supporters and campaigners. If they were here today, I know that they would be in this room supporting all of you. Such is the appeal of a group of people who refuse to peddle in divisive identity politics and refuse to lie about basic facts of reality. Our province hasn't had a new party to offer any real change from the status quo in my lifetime. I think this is a really big moment. That said, there's so much work to be done in order to maintain, restore, and protect free expression and women's sex-based rights in our beautiful province. Last November, I wrote a story about a Saanich mother named Angie Tyrell. She brought her 10-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old friend to the local swimming pool. It's about a 1-hour drive from where we're standing right now. After the girls were finished swimming, they rushed to Angie, who had been watching from the sidelines before waiting outside of the change room for them. The girls ran up to her and they said, "There's a man in the shower." The man was dressed in a pink children's bikini with sparkles and a tiara, princess tiara. So Angie had the girls go into the washroom, change in stalls where this perverted man couldn't watch them. And then she saw the man enter the bathroom area as well, and a teenage girl who had been getting undressed in horror put her clothes back on and ran into a different stall herself. All of the women and girls in the space were uncomfortable, very obviously, and why wouldn't they be? So what happened to Angie when she complained to staff at the pool, including a manager? This is the Commonwealth Place Rec Center in Saanich. She was told that the center is diverse and inclusive, and that they welcome all persons to use the facilities that align with their internal gender feelings. In other words, they said there was absolutely nothing wrong with a grown, hairy man in a tiny children's princess bikini watching girls and women shower and undress. Excuse me. The same thing happened in Nanaimo in 2023, with another male, this one wearing a wig and a face mask, intimidating females in their own change rooms. This one attempted to look over and under stalls. And how did staff at the aquatic center react? They didn't. These stories are commonplace. Men invade our spaces. The women who dare to speak up are told to be nice, and nothing is done to stop the men. The women who go public are labeled terrible, transphobic bigots. About 2 years ago, a male with long hair and a female gender identity named Tyler Porter was using a women's shelter in downtown Vancouver. He was posting selfies on social media from inside the women's shelter. These included photos of himself naked, in the bathroom with erections, and words bragging about intimidating the women also staying in this shelter for women who've been abused. So what did the staff at the downtown Eastside Women's Shelter do when women raised the alarm? They defended the male. They said the women who had concerns about this behavior were transphobic. This is an actual quote from the organization. "We refuse to engage in a dialogue that gives platform to transphobic groups or individuals or otherwise does damage to women who are transgender." It's the same old story. I'm sharing a few examples of the stories that made it public, but you know that these stories are happening daily in British Columbia and across Canada. And there are women who are too afraid to go public, too afraid to ask for help. I could stand here for hours just telling you about all of the stories that I've heard and I know personally. I obviously don't have the time to do that, but I am going to share another one. This one is in Abbotsford, BC, where we have the Fraser Valley Institution for Women. It's a women's prison, and it also includes a mother and baby program for the women who reside there and have young children. So guess who else is living in this women's prison? An individual named Tara D'Souza, who was once known as Adam Laboucan. Laboucan became Canada's youngest dangerous offender after raping a 3-month-old infant and drowning a toddler. He decided to become a woman when he was serving in men's prison, and now he resides in the Fraser Valley Institute for Women alongside women and some babies and children. He also received large breast implants with our tax dollars. How lovely. This really sounds too insane to be true, but it is true, and it makes you wonder, why don't more women speak up? Perhaps if they've heard about my own legal battles, they'll be too afraid for fear of having their lives upended and ruined. I can't blame them. Staff at the Saanich pool near here, who I've spoken to, they're too afraid to go on record and speak out against their workplace policies because they believe they'll be fired. And it's the same thing in healthcare, where nearly every single physician and nurse that I know and have spoken to about this issue are aligned with me, as most people in this room I'm sure are, but they are too afraid to utter these views aloud because they know what will happen to them. All of our workplaces and institutions in BC have been taken over. So how else have women in BC suffered because of gender ideology? Perhaps you've heard of Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter. It is the single, only remaining female-only rape shelter in Canada. They had dead rats nailed to their door alongside graffiti that spoke about killing TERFs. So TERFs is the slur that is used to describe women like me who are critical of gender ideology. And then move on to our Human Rights Tribunal. It's another provincial institution infected by wokeness and happy to trample on women's rights. We all know about the infamous testicle waxing cases, in which the state weighed in on whether women should be forced against their will to handle male testicles, because for the male in question, it would constitute quote-unquote gender-affirming medical care. Our province became an international joke because of our Human Rights Tribunal. They continue to issue outrageous decisions that award professional victims, and they fine businesses and individuals who've had the unfortune of encountering such toxic victims in their everyday lives. From taking $30,000 from a small restaurant owner to give to a so-called non-binary woman who worked there for less than a month and complained that she'd been misgendered, to awarding $10,000 to a tenant whose landlord said that if she got a gender-affirming double mastectomy, it may make her feel uncomfortable. BC is a place where everyone is expected to cater to gender ideologues who are destroying women's rights and destroying our free speech. A more recent BC Human Rights Tribunal ruling also issued a decision wherein they gave themselves the authority to monitor and police our online speech. So I know a lot of Canadians have been celebrating the end of the online harms bill that was killed when Justin Trudeau prorogued Parliament. But here in BC, it's not as much of a celebration because we have our very own version here with our BC Human Rights Tribunal. Not all provinces have this, there are about 4, but BC is one of the provinces where we have to worry about this body regulating our speech. So all of this is to say that there's so much work that needs to be done in BC to protect women and by extension children from gender ideology, and there's so much work to make BC a place where citizens are not afraid to express themselves freely and as is their charter protected right. Your mothers, sisters, daughters, they do not have the right to sex segregated spaces in BC. Battered, abused, and raped women, unless they go to Vancouver Rape Relief, have no other spaces in the province where they can seek help and not expect a male to be residing alongside them in their rape or domestic violence shelter. Women also do not have the right to sports teams with female only. If I could impress upon you one thing today, it would be this. Please just don't forget that you are the party for BC women. There's no other party that has so much as the courage to stand up and define what a woman is. BC women are depending on all of you, whether they know it or not and whether they accept it or not. David Eby and the NDP are well aware of the stories that I've shared today. They don't care. Eby doesn't care. He doesn't want to hear about it, and in fact, he might actually be proud of these stories because they fit into his delusions about BC being a woke DEI utopia. He's been forced to face the music over some of his failed drug policies, but Eby has yet to be called to account for his disgraceful refusal to even acknowledge the erosion of women's sex-based rights in BC and in Canada. Regardless, I'm hopeful about BC because of this political movement and the leadership that so many of you in this room have displayed. When I started to speak and write about gender nearly a decade ago, I could have only dreamed about standing here today in a room full of people who wouldn't be afraid to go on record and challenge orthodoxy, including orthodoxy about gender. This is huge. Before I end, I would like to do a little call out. So I believe the CBC legislative reporter, Katie DeRosa, is here today. I just have to say that the CBC's bias, cowardice, and outright lies to reporting on gender the bias, the lies when reporting on gender, that's no small part of the problem that women and children in BC find themselves in today. And as I know folks on the far left like to say in these sorts of situations, do better. Do better for women and children. The political winds are shifting in BC. We've had enough of what the CBC and what the NDP are trying to sell us. And the Conservatives here all wield immense power to be agents of change. I can't wait to see what all of you have in store for BC. Thank you so much.